So that tells us a little bit about what vision is. And today we're in part 5. So we've talked about 4 different things. If you have not been able to be a part of all of those, they are available. At least you can hear them on our SoundCloud connection. And we can give you instructions on how to get there later, but also on Facebook Live, Facebook on our group page, you can get all of the series that we've done up to that point. But the first series that we talked about, the first message in this series, we talked about, it was an introduction. And we talked about how vision is something that's born on the inside of you. Vision is something that is stirred, and it's stirred from multiple inspirations. It could be something that you're inspired to do. It could be something that you see that bothers you. And then you come up in your mind or in your heart, there's something that just kind of rises up in you as to a solution for that, and you're figuring out what it is. And many of you have done this before. You've looked at a situation and you said, that could be way better than that, and then you come up with a way. And that's what vision does. Vision is that part that's on the inside of you that starts to create that. And then we talked about when you finally get that, it's not necessarily time to go forth with the vision at that point. It's not time to necessarily execute what you see, but at that time, and that's when we did the title, Ready, Set, Wait. Because while you're waiting, something is happening. While you're waiting, and there are reasons why you need to wait, because first of all, the vision may be fresh in you, and when it's fresh, it's burning. It's just like a baby, but you have to treat it like a baby. You know, a baby's being born, it takes 9 months for a baby, and while the baby is growing on the inside, something is also happening to the mother as the baby is growing. The mother's being prepared. There's parts of her body that's changing too. So when you have a vision that's being born on the inside of you, part of you are changing so that you can execute the vision when it's time for the vision to be born. You are growing, the vision is growing, God is preparing both of you. And so that's when we did the title, In the Meantime. In the meantime is what's happening while you're waiting. You're praying and you're planning. You're praying and you're planning. You're praying to God, keeping your heart open, keeping your mind open, keeping your focus on what you dreamed about. Because many times people have a great idea and then life just happens. And then all of a sudden, 5 months later, the idea that you had, you see in a store somewhere where somebody else did it because you just totally forgot all about it. Prayer will help you to keep that focus because you're believing that God will give you what you need, and you're experiencing your relationship with God, and God is preparing you, and the vision is maturing in you so that you can be able to even express it even more. And that's when you run up against roadblocks as to, well, you start thinking and planning, and you say, well, you get to the spot where you're planning and you're thinking, and now you're thinking, okay, well, I don't know how to do this. So how would that ever happen, or how would this ever happen? And that's not the time to give up. That's the time to realize that God is also working behind the scenes, making things happen for you that you don't have no idea of. And we saw some of this in the life of Nehemiah. We saw this also in the life of David. We talked about that in one of the messages of God of How. We talked about David, who God had Samuel anoint to be king while he was still a boy, and he's still going through all of this, but he's anointing this boy to be the king, but they had a king. So how is he going to become the king if we already have a king? And the king that they already had was ordained by God. And so what does this guy do? He's anointed to be the king. And what did David do? He went back to doing what he does and just depending on God. He was a shepherd. He took care of his dad's sheep, but he was also a warrior on the inside. And I believe the biggest part of the warrior that was on the inside of David was his connection to what he believed God had promised. And when he saw something that didn't line up with what God had promised, it was a fight. And that's what happened when he ran into Goliath. He knew what God had promised Israel, and he runs to take his brother's food that day. His dad sent him to take his brother's food, and there's Goliath in the valley yelling, "Give me a champion. I'll fight the champion. Who wants to come fight me?" And he said, "Who is this guy who's defying the armies of God?" And so he made the connection of when things are out of order, they are defying what God has said. And so I'm in agreement with God. And there are things in your life, things that you see that are defying what God has promised. And when they don't line up with what God has promised, there should be a fight on the inside of you that rises up. And so when that fight rises up and you're able to pull all of the things, the vision that you see and what you can see, and that's what David did. When he saw the giant, everybody else was running and hiding. And in David's mind, when he finally got ready to go fight the giant, he says, you come at me with a spear and a sword. He says, but I come at you in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, who you defy. So he's saying, that's bigger than any army. So that's who I'm with. That's who's with me. That's who's coming at me. And that giant couldn't realize that. He's like, he was mad. He's like, what is this? You guys sending me a boy? I mean, the dude was already over 9 feet tall, and they're going to send a boy, not their biggest man. They're going to send a boy. And this boy doesn't even have a shield, doesn't even have a spear, doesn't even have a sword. He's coming out here with a slingshot. And see, that brings back memories, because the first time, I used to make slingshots when I was a kid, because we didn't have toys, and we made them. We'd take an old inner tube from a tire, and that would be, anyway, we find us a branch from a tree that was shaped like a Y, and then a big Y, and then we'd put some rubber on it. And, well, the inner tube was our rubber. We'd find something like some kind of leather, and we'd make them, and we'd shoot birds off the, anyway. But he killed a giant with a slingshot. Well, he knocked him out with the slingshot. And when he knocked the giant out, he ran to him, took the giant's sword out of his sheath, took that sword, climbed up on the giant's chest, and cut his head off. Dead. And that's the way we need to treat things. Not people, things that come at us that defy the vision that God has given us. And one of the things that hinder us, I believe, is the way we handle the vision and our ability to get past the vision being on the inside of us and the vision coming out of us. And one of the things that has to happen for that is we have to realize that vision is not just for you. You may think, even though you may think whatever vision you may have, even if it's for your family, even if you have kids and you have a vision for your children and they're small, they're young, and you want them to be healthy, and that's one of the first things, I just want them to be healthy. Even before they're born, you say, I just want a healthy baby. I hope it's a boy, but I'm just glad it's a healthy baby. When my first child was born, I was hoping for a boy, but it was Tashita. And when she came, we was just glad she came, and so, but you're hoping for God's best, and you want God's best for whatever your vision is. Maybe you're thinking about marriage, and you want to get married, and you need to have a vision for that. And as that vision fills your heart for it, you need a way to get that out of you so that other people can experience it. You can't get married by yourself. And so how do you get that out of you? And one of the ways that I believe, one of the things that happens as the vision is building on the inside of us, we fail to take the time to clarify the vision and get it very clear. And one way to do that is to put something on paper, write something down, begin to lay it out. Vision is something that you need to be able to see, because vision also changes as it matures. It changes, it grows. And so it doesn't look the same. But if you never wrote anything down, you may not even be able to tell if something is changing. And so I read a book that was recommended to me by a good friend, and I pulled this title, today's title, from that book. Actually, if I had done, and this is much of the same content that I was going to share last week, and it had a different title, but I changed the title and changed the content just a little because of the way this book impacted me. And this book is called Traction. But today's title is See What I'm Saying. Have you ever heard people say, see what I'm saying? When people start talking to you and they ask you see what I'm saying? And many times you're like, no, it's still foggy, bro. It's like, I can't see what you're saying. And But when you can see, and let me show you the title of the book. So if you want to get it, I encourage you to read. And it's the book Traction. It's by Gino Wickman. And it did wonders for me. And I pulled this title from it. But as you can, when we talk about see what I'm saying, in other words, you have this vision on the inside of you. Now, the thing that we don't realize many times is you cannot accomplish a vision by yourself. God gives you the vision, but you can't do it by yourself. Even if it's just a vision of getting married, you can't do it by yourself. You need some other people, and especially if you are president of an organization, CEO, or something like this. Listen to me. You need to be able to inspire the people who need to help you to accomplish the vision. And so, when you ask the question, "Do you see what I'm saying?" I believe you need to answer another question. And here's the question I believe you need to answer is, can you say what you are seeing? Are you able to say what you see inside? Are you able to verbalize the picture that you see? The picture that you see of how things should be, because what's in front of you is how things are not and how they should not be. But you are able to look past that, see a picture of how it should be. Now you need to figure out, how do I say what I see? And you need to figure that out before you ask somebody, do you see what I'm saying? Because you need to be able to say what you're seeing. So before you can see, before they can see what you're saying, you've got to be able to say what you're seeing. So before they can see what you're saying, you got to be able to say what you are seeing. And when you are able to say what you are seeing, then you can help them to see what you are saying. I'm just slowing down so they can kind of sink in just a little bit. Because many times, especially if it's a burning vision, I have had things that you start saying it so fast. I mean, there's reasons why that happens. Your brain can think, I forget how many times faster than you're able to speak. But that's why you get tripped up on your words sometimes. And you have so many thoughts that's coming and so many things that are coming at you. And God created us so that we can manage those things. And one of the things that once we're able to learn how to manage that, then we can use it on purpose so that we can figure out how to get what's out of us on some paper and then be able to say what that is so people can then see it. Because people can't see what you're seeing until you can say what you're seeing. Because you can't just give, it would be great if you could just transpose the vision that you see. If you could just give that to somebody. But the way to transfer it is through words. And so we have to share words so that their words, now your words are creating pictures on the inside of them. Just like the pictures that you see, many times words create pictures. And when you're able to share the right words in the right way, then you can take those words and paint a picture on the inside of somebody else so that they can see them. But there's something that God has given us, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, even in this series, that helps us with that. When you have so many thoughts coming at you, so many every day. There are thousands and possibly millions of thoughts that are bombarding your mind throughout the day. But we have learned how to filter out the ones that we don't think that are necessary. And your subconscious does that. And once it's learned how to do something, your subconscious mind figures it out. And now you don't even have to think about it. And I use the example all the time of when you learn how to drive. When you first learn how to drive, you're thinking consciously about every single thing. You turn your signal left and right so that you can change lanes or make a turn. You're thinking about the brake and the accelerator, which one's the right one. And you're thinking about all of these things. But then after you've learned it and your subconscious mind got a handle on it, you do that signal thing, and if it's raining, you don't even have to think, oh, I need to turn on the windshield wipers. Your hand just goes to where it is. You don't have to take your eye off the road. You just go where it is, and you figure, and you got it all figured out. What's in your brain that's doing that is something that's called the reticular activating system. And when you get that reticular activating system, we all have it. God gave it to us. If we didn't have it, we'd go crazy, because we'd have to consciously do every single thing for every single activity, every single action, and it would just drive you nuts. But your brain, that reticular activating system, that little piece that sits right down at the base of your brain, it filters everything that goes in. And once you've learned something, once you've given your conscious mind something to do and assigned it to the subconscious mind, now you don't have to think about that anymore. But there are other things that happen when this happens. Once, when you have any kind of belief, any kind of thought, and you take that and you lock it into your subconscious, now, in order for someone else to change your mind, they got to get through that reticular activating system and be able to give you enough information so that you will believe that information over and above what you've already locked into. Your reticular activating system is at work doing what it does, and that's why it's hard to get some people to see what you're saying, because what you're saying is locked out from what they're believing, and so they can't see what you're saying. And so in order for you to be able to get them to see what you're saying, you got to be able to understand what's going on in their minds so that you can paint a picture that can get to that. In other words, there are situations like where your own mind blocks out things. And so that's why people's mind block out things. They block out what you say sometimes. Have you ever lost your keys? And then once you say, I've lost my keys, and you keep saying, I lost my keys, I lost my keys, you are saying what's blocking you from finding them. Many times when you finally find them, they were right in front of your eyes. But you were saying they were lost. They weren't lost. But your brain is at work. Whatever you believe, if you believe they're lost, they're lost. You can't see them. They're right there, but you can't see them. And what's worse is if, say, you're driving somewhere and something doesn't look right. And then once you convince yourself that you were lost, you are in trouble. When you say, I'm lost, now you're in trouble. You got to believe yourself out of that. You got to either believe I'm going to find somebody, or what do you usually look for? If you're a man, you probably look for a gas station or something. But many times, we try to march our way out of it, and we don't want to stop and ask anybody. We don't think we're lost. And your spouse is saying, you're lost. We're lost. and then she says, do you know where you are? Do you know where we are? Where do you have us? Anyway, and I'm sure you can think of a lot of stories like that. But your reticular activating system blocks out things that's coming against your belief system. So if you believe you're lost, you're lost. But there's three things that always get past your reticular activating system. Three things that always get past your reticular activating system. Regardless of what you've locked in, there's three things that always get past there. Number one, things that you value, things that are unique, and things that threaten you. If you value something, a good example of this, and I know Tia is not here, the newest person in our congregation that has a baby, but regardless of how old your children are, if you're a mom, that you've had a baby, you hear your babies cry, you don't care what else you hear. You can hear sirens, trains, everything else. You hear your babies cry, it gets in, doesn't it? Because the value is so high that it gets past everything else that you're hearing. Because, see, your reticular activating system, it's filtering things that you hear, things that you see. It's filtering all of those things as they come in. But then you put some value on something, it's going to get in. Same thing with something that's unique. When something that's different, the unique, then it gets past your filtering system. Something that threatens you, it gets past your reticular activating system. And it's a good thing it does. But this is what we need to remember as we're preparing to share our vision. Because you can't do your vision by yourself. And if you're going to get someone else to hear it and get inspired and motivated by it, you got to understand, you got to give them the value of it. That's got to be included in whatever your vision is. You got to share the value. If you want to get married, you got to figure out what's the value of someone, what am I going to add to their life? See, many of us, we're thinking, what are they going to add to my life? But you got to think, what can I add to their life? What am I bringing to the table? Because you're depending on them to hear what you are saying to cause them to buy into your vision. So what value do you bring? Whatever your vision is, what value do you bring? What uniqueness? So if it's the same old, you hear the words blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah. And that's when they say it goes in one ear and come out the other one. That means they didn't hear it. It's gone. And I don't recommend this all the time, but if your vision is a solution to something that's threatening somebody, then you need to show them the threat that they have. Many people can't see how dangerous things are. They just think everything's okay. It's been okay for so long. In the message that we're going to share today with Nehemiah, we're going to, I'll wait till I get there, otherwise I'm going to get ahead of my story. But it's amazing how he used this to inspire the people, because Nehemiah couldn't build the walls by himself. And so what we're talking about preparing is, in order to see what I'm saying and get someone to see what you're saying, you got to prepare your verbal picture. And I call that an elevator speech. It's something short, something that you put together, you have written it down, you have figured it out, and it's short. It's about 30 seconds long. It could be a little longer, but the reason it's called, in business, people use this all the time. When I was in sales, this was one of the things they taught you. Whatever you're selling and marketing, whatever you're marketing, you've got to get your elevator speech together, because that term, that phrase comes from the ability to get on an elevator, which takes about 30 seconds from the top to the bottom, and give someone your spiel, give someone your speech, give someone what it is that you do, who you are, the value that you bring, whatever the uniqueness is, sharing with them how you help people from whatever they're being threatened by, and you share that in 30 seconds. That's the speech. And when you're able to do that, and it takes a lot to do that, you got to practice it, you got to work on it, you got to hone it down, and you got to get that done. And so when Nehemiah learned how to do this, and if you remember, in our story, we started off with Nehemiah hearing from his brother who had come from Jerusalem. Now, these people that were in Jerusalem, they had still been there, but when his brother told him that the walls were down, the gates are burned, the people were in a bad situation. And remember Nehemiah, he cried for days. He said he mourned, he wept, and he fasted, and he prayed. And this was the beginning of him birthing a vision, God birthing a vision on the inside of him for what God wanted. He obviously held on to whatever the scriptures were, because he had a picture of what it should be. Because these walls that he went to rebuild, they weren't burned during his lifetime. They had been burned down for over 100 years. So the people living there, probably nobody living had ever seen the wall up. So here is a vision that's coming, and he's got to inspire people to help him build a wall that the people never saw. Not only did they never see it, the result of what was there was still there. You'll find out as he shares his picture. He's showing them the threat, and he's showing them how bad things are, so that they can see what he is saying. And so let's go there, and let's look at Nehemiah, the second chapter, and I'll bring you into what he's saying. He said, so I arrived in Jerusalem 3 days later. This is after they had left. This is a 3-day trip. He's saying 3 days after he'd been there. He's been there for 3 days. After he's made this 1,000-mile trip, he's been there for 3 days. He hadn't said anything to anybody. They don't know why he's there. And that's what he's saying. So I arrived in Jerusalem. 3 days later, I slipped out during the night. So after he's been there for 3 days, probably resting from that long trip. But he said, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. In other words, he slipped out during the night to do something. And we need to figure out what he was up to. And he said, and he's letting us know, he said, go to the next scripture for me. He said, I had not told anyone about the plans that God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. Sometimes we spill our guts about what we want to do too soon. And we haven't figured out how to say it. We haven't figured out what the value is. We know what it is. We know God wants a new wall, but we haven't figured out what we need to say to the people. Nehemiah had to figure out, what do I say to these people who've been living here all this time with these what can I say? They've been okay with the wall so far. Nobody else has said anything about building the walls. Why do we even need a wall? They just gotten used to it. We don't have a wall around the city. And in our culture, we don't understand how important that is, but that's very important for a city and a town and a village in that place and at that time. He said, but I didn't tell anybody what was in my heart for what God wanted me to do at Jerusalem. He said, we took no pack animals with us except the donkey that I was riding on. So he's saying, I sneaked out in the middle of the night, and this is what he went to do. I'm going to summarize the next scriptures for you. These are verses 13 through 15. He just says, and you can read this later for yourself. He's saying we went through the valley gate. These are all the different gates around the city. He said we went through the valley gate. We went through Jackal's Well. We went through the Dung Gate. He mentions all of these different places, and he got to a place where there was so much rubble and rumble and torn down gates and burned stuff. He says, my donkey couldn't even get through it. This is how bad the situation was. He needed this information so that he could paint a picture for them. So he's going out, he's investigating everything. He's saying, he inspected the walls, he inspected the gates, and he ended up coming back around to the same valley gate that he entered into, where he come back out. And you can read that for yourselves later. But then the next verse, he says, the city officials did not know what I had been up to. They didn't know why I was out there in the middle of the night. They didn't know what I was doing, because I hadn't shared anything with them about my plans. Now, these are the people who, if he's going to get something done, these are the people who are in charge. These are the people that could help him. Remember what's happened so far? We know the whole story, and we remember what happens from the beginning. We already know that it seems that Nehemiah got no miracles. God didn't suddenly appear the next morning and this gate was rebuilt and that gate was rebuilt and send in a whole bunch of people to rebuild it. He didn't experience any miracles like that. The kind of miracles he experienced were the same kind of miracles that we experienced. He prayed, and God moved on somebody else's heart to do something that could affect what he was trying to do. God moved on the heart of the king that could affect, and that was the biggest thing. What's he doing now in Jerusalem? He was a cupbearer to the king. And so all of a sudden, God has been moving. And he knows that God is moving. And now he's here, and it's almost time to share the vision. It's almost time for him to take this thing public. It's almost time for him to get started. And when he said, he said that I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, to the priests. In other words, the political people, I hadn't spoken to them. The religious leaders, I hadn't spoken to them. The nobles, the smart people, the lawyers, the officials, I hadn't spoken to any of them or anyone else in the administration. I hadn't spoken to anybody about any of this. So why did he do this? I believe there's at least two things that he was doing. Number one, Nehemiah wanted to make sure that he had an honest assessment. God had given him a vision of what to do based on what his brother had told him what was happening, but he hadn't seen it. He'd never been there. And these people have been living there all this time. These walls have been burned down for over 150, almost 150 years, over 100 years. And so he's getting an honest assessment, which is the same thing you need to do. Whatever your vision is the solution to some problem, or it needs to be. Whatever your vision is, it's going to make something better. Then you need to get an honest assessment of how bad things are right now so that you can share that as a part of the motivation to get people to see what you're saying. If things are really bad, sometimes things are really bad and you can't see how bad they are. I mean, with these people, the walls, they're living in this mess. They're living with, the donkey can't even get past certain things, the rubble from the gates, and they're living there. They've been living there all their lives that way. Didn't bother them until he said something about it. Sometimes things that you have solutions to, they don't bother people until you say something and paint a picture for them of how bad it is. They just don't know. Then all of a sudden, they can kind of see. They can see what you're saying. And they can begin to say, oh, this is really bad. And the second thing, during this inspection, he made no pre-announcement that he was making an inspection. He was digging into what was wrong. He was digging into what was not right. He was digging into the way things were, although they should have been another way. He was digging into the negative side of that so that he could share all of that with where people were and so that those people will be able to join him with their inspiration to do something about it. And then he went on to the 17th verse and he said this. He said, but now I said to them, ooh, this is what we've been given. This is what we've been waiting. What in the world did he say? And it's so easy to miss this because it says, but now I said to them. But if you figure out all of what he's gone through before he said a single word, then you can see the impact of the few words he said. This is Nehemiah's elevator speech. He's been preparing for this, and now he's ready to say it. So he said, you know very well what trouble we are in. That's the first thing he said to them. Now, why in the world would he tell them, in other words, because he goes on and he says the gates, what trouble we're in, Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. So let's look at the first part of that. He says, now you know very well what trouble we're in. One of the first things Nehemiah is doing here is he's identifying with the people. He didn't say, he's come from 1,000 miles away, but he's still identifying with his people. And he said, this is the trouble. Who's in? We are in. I am with you. I didn't just come to fix your problem. This is our problem. We have a problem. He identified with the people. And then he went on to say, Jerusalem is in ruins. The gates have been destroyed by fire. And then he says, let us rebuild. In other words, the second thing he's sharing here is how bad things are, how serious things are. In other words, when you look at the word Jerusalem, when he said Jerusalem lies in ruins, that for any Hebrew, any person that understands and that had been raised to understand that through their lineage, Jesus Christ would someday be born. Every woman expected, they looked for that miracle. Every generation, they kept looking. And now, here is in this city, Jerusalem lies in ruins. This is a threat to what God had promised. And he's sharing that with them. He wants them to feel this. He wants them to see how serious this is. We need to do something about this. God has made promises, and we're just allowing things to be the way they come. Whatever happens, it just happens. You shouldn't just allow things to happen to you just because that's what's going on. You need to have some kind of standard based on what you believe God has promised you. You need to have some kind of standard, some kind of grounds that you're standing on for what God has promised you. He said, then I told them about the gracious hand of God and how his hand had been on me, and about my conversation with the king. So what Nehemiah is doing now, he's saying, look, God, he's got the attention of all the leaders, all the religious leaders, all the political leaders, everyone that has any influence in the city. He has all their attention, and he begins to tell his story. He's saying, look, I was the cupbearer to the king. I was comfortable. I didn't have any problems. My life was set for me. And then my brother came and told me what was happening here. And it broke my heart. This is what he's sharing. He's sharing his story. You need to learn how to share your story so you can connect people with how you got to where you are in the vision. You have a story. Believe me, your vision, if you have a vision, you have a story. You got there some way. And you need to be able to connect the story. So he's telling them, he said, and when my brother explained to me that the walls were down, the gates were burned, he's like, this happened 100 years ago, and it's still this way? This is, he's saying, so I prayed. He's telling them, I fasted for days. I prayed, and I mourned, and I wept, and I cried, and I prayed out to the God of heaven, who these people knew something about. When he says the God of heaven, that means not any other God, not some of the other gods that somebody created, but the God of heaven, who we Hebrews understand. We know that that's the only real God. And he's saying, I cried out to the God of heaven. And as he said there, then I explained to them my conversation with the king. He said, and so obviously God moved on the heart of the king. He's saying, for 4 months I'm going and I'm miserable. This vision is building on the inside of me. And one day I go in to give the king his wine, and the king looks at me and says, Nehemiah, what's wrong? You look sick, but I know you're not sick. He said, the only thing this could be is just a broken heart. What's going on? He said, the king asked me that. The king gave me this audience with him. And then the king said, how can I help? You need to write that one down. How can I help? When somebody asks you that, you need to have some stuff ready. And that's what he had been working on for 4 months while he's praying and planning. He said, how you can help. He said, so I told the king, he's telling them his story. So I told the king, here's how you can help. He said, my people, now he's expressing his heart, why he's feeling sad. He's saying, my people, my fathers, my grandfathers, the people, the lineage where I came from, they're in a city where the gates are burned. They have no protection. They have nothing. The doors, they have no walls. The city is vulnerable to any enemy. And when he explained that, that's when the king said, well, how can I help? He said, well, if you would allow me to leave my post as your cupbearer, that's an important job. I mean, the king has developed trust, and I mean, you go through a whole bunch of stuff to become a cupbearer. You're risking your life, and the king realizes that you are risking your life. Who do you know would risk their life for you? And if you found one person that would do that, and they ask you, I need to go somewhere for 12 years, because that's how long he was gone. And that's how long he told him he would be gone before he got the okay to leave. He said, I mean, if you had somebody like that, would you be ready to let him go? I found one person who I can trust with my life. For real? Especially after going through a couple that you thought you could trust and you found out you couldn't. And you find somebody you can trust. He's saying, when the king asked me, and I told him, if you would let me go, and the king asked me how long I'll be gone, and I told him, and then he said, okay, what else? What do you need? He said, so then I started on my list. He said, I had a list of things I asked for. I asked for all this wood. You see me coming into town with train loads of lumber and all this stuff. I asked the king for Asa in his forest, the woods, where they would cut this down for me. And anyway, this is on his way. So he comes into town with all this stuff, and he's explaining to them, so this is what God has done. This moment that we have, and this is how your vision needs to be formed. It's like things have been aligning themselves for this moment. All of these things have happened. They've lined up just right. And so Nehemiah is telling them, and here we are right now. The king has allowed me to be here, and we need to build these walls. One of the words that he used in the first part of what he explained to them, he says, to get rid of this disgrace. To get rid of this disgrace. We're not bringing happiness to the heart of God right now. And there are many things that you see that does not bring joy to the heart of God. And when you make it a part of who you are to bring joy to the heart of God, then God stirs others. When you're able to stir others who have that same feeling in their heart. And when you're able to do that, those hearts connect together. Then you're able to accomplish something. He said to them, and about my conversation with the king, go ahead and go. He said, they replied at once. When he got done with that little short speech, explaining to them his whole story, he said, they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. That's how they got started. And next week we might talk about some struggles they had after they got started. Can you imagine? You feel like, okay, this is a good ending. They got started. But did you know halfway through, 26 weeks into the project, they gave up? And that's what we'll talk about next week. But here's our challenge for this week as we move forward. Your challenge this week is to say what you are seeing. So figure out how to put down on paper what you are seeing. You got to figure out how to get that picture that's in your mind and in your head out on some paper. And then when you get it on paper, it's like now you're reading what you said. If you've ever done this, it's amazing. You'll read something, and I shared a little bit about a project we had. We wanted to build a house. We talked about this. I forget how many years, but I had written it down. I wanted 10 acres, and I wanted this, and I wanted that. And I still have that written down. I have kept somewhat of it's almost like a diary. I got introduced to daytimers, if you ever heard of daytimers, in the 80s. And I still have my notes and things that I have said and planned since 1986 up through today. And so I have what I prayed about. This day I prayed about this. And I wanted this house. I wanted 10 acres. And we believed God for it. And I explained to you how we went through many, many things. But at this point, we have 20 acres, not just 10, 20 acres, where I believe God is just doing what I believe that he said that he would do. And you can put that vision together, and you can figure it out and write it down and go back and look at it. You know what? It has power even if you don't look at it. You know how I know? Because I had forgotten that I had written it down. And went back and revisited some things. And one day, Thomasine and I just started looking through what we had prayed for, and what we had itemized. And we could check off a whole bunch of things that we didn't have, that at that point we were praying for. And so you need a record. Write stuff down. And then learn how to say what you've written down. Learn how to say what you are seeing so that it motivates others to join you in achieving the vision. As it motivates others, that's because you can't do it by yourself. Remember that. You can't do this alone. No vision was given to you to accomplish by yourself. You need other players. You need people who have skills that you don't have. You need people who can reach other people that you can't reach. And those other people are the people you need. And so you have to learn how to say what you are seeing so that you can start that ball rolling. Your challenge is now to create what I call your elevator speech. And I explain that to you, so that now once you got this elevator speech together, now you're just waiting to get in front of the right people at the right time so that they can help you accomplish the vision. So there's 5 action steps to do this, and this is what we'll end with today. Number 1, tell your story. Figure out what your story is, tell it. Your story connects people together. You're going to do this with people, and people remember stories. You remember stories. You don't necessarily remember things, but you remember stories. And so tell your story. Number 2 is paint a visual picture of how bad it is. Do some investigating. Look at how bad things are without whatever your vision is the solution to. Find the worst things you can about it and write that down. Somebody needs to know that. Everybody don't know that. Maybe a few people do, but that needs to be a part of your selling pitch. This is how bad it is. You guys can't see this? This is terrible. You've seen people who do that. You didn't realize how bad things was, and somebody said, "What? This is bad." And now you're like, yeah, I guess that's kind of bad. Then paint a visual picture of the solution, of how what your vision provides the solution to this. Here's how bad it is, and look at what we can do. Look at what we could be doing. Look at what could be. And then that's when you provoke their engagement with you. You'd have told your story, how it's connecting you with them. You identifying with them. It's not just your problem, it's our problem. We need to solve this. And we're at this particular time. This is connecting the dots. We're at this particular point in time. This is what's missing in our generation. This is what we need. And we can connect all this together. And you can see this is the time we need to move now. And that's how you pull your story together, tell your story, and get people to see what you are seeing, what you're saying, because you can say now what you see. So here's some action steps as we go through that. Number 1, tell your story. Open the door with how you became intimate with this. How did you come up with this solution? Tell us your story. You tell your story, you connect people with your story. People remember your story. They may not remember the criteria of all the things how you got, but if you tell your story, they'll remember your story. Number 2, then paint a verbal picture. And you can have this. We already have this on our Facebook group page, so you can download it. But we have hard copies here for you, so you can leave with a hard copy if you desire, so you can have these steps with you. Then paint a verbal picture of how bad things are or could be prior to your implementation of your vision. So maybe things aren't real bad yet, but you can see that things are getting worse unless you implement what you're talking about and the vision that you have. Share that. That is, regardless to what your vision is, do that. And number 3, paint a visual picture of what it would look like after your solution is in place. And this is the way things could look. And you get people to see that. And then the 4th thing is provoking them to engage with you. Step 4, provoke them to engage with you. Invite those that you need to join with you and help create the new environment that can be achieved only by working together, because you can't do it by yourself. You need other people working with you. And then finally, step 5, which is to connect the dots. And that's where you paint the verbal picture of how big, this is the biggest part of this, how God has been influencing you and how he's orchestrating all these things that's been lining up so far. All these things that are just falling into place. How can you miss that God is at work doing this? And now we are here, and here's where we are. Here's the solution. Here's how bad it is. And God has blessed us so far. He's given us value so far to be right here. And if you help me, we can do this. And that's when things start to happen. That's when the people rise up and say what those people said. Let's get started. Let's build. And they got started. So let me pray for you. And if you're here today and you want to find out more about Grace Transformational Ministries, or if you want to find out more about a relationship with Jesus Christ, whatever you want your next step to be, we have someone to talk to you at our starting point table, and we can talk to you about that. And we can get, and if you're online today, you can do the same thing. Go to our website and click on the connect button and then select connect, and then just fill out the information where it says contact us. Tell us what you would like for us to do, what step that you'd like to take, and we'll pray with you, we'll connect with you, and we'll respond to make sure that you get whatever it is that you desire to do in your next step. So if you would bow your heads, I want to pray with you. Father, we thank you today. You've been so good to us. We thank you for this word today. We thank you for giving us the ability to see what you have placed in our hearts, but not just to see it, but to begin to learn how to say what we see so that it also inspires others to be able to see what we are saying. And so I pray that you would give us courage today, the courage to begin to write it down, the courage to begin to explain it to ourselves, to say it over and over and over again, even until we're tired of it, so that it's so much on the inside of us that it's just like an elevator speech. We can spit it out in 30 seconds. Here's how bad things are. Here's what it looks like if we change, and help me to get it done. I pray that you would bless us to move forward, even in our own vision here at Grace Transformational Ministries, where we can put the vision together and move forward with what you would have us to do in this community and even online community to change and help people change their individual lives and change their communities. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Have a great day.